My coworkers have all been complaining about how early it gets dark now. At the very least, they have small boxes over Zoom making small talk about the weather and weekends before our morning meetings. But I don't blame them. Talk like that is simple, structured, a formula with exponents that Jake in management and Talia from QA can easily fill in. What I have to say is not so simple. But I disagreed with my coworkers. I liked how dark it got so early. The nights had become a haven for me, in contrast to the days when I sit at home, immunocompromised and terrified, behind the screen of my laptop. Always hidden behind a screen. My town is small, but it's full of people who still believe in conspiracy theories about tracking chips in vaccines and post angry rants about privacy on Facebook, the irony completely lost on them. So I remain at home. It's fine because I live alone and am used to being alone. The only thing I miss are my walks, which I can still take because the entire town closes down around 9 o'clock. I leave my house around 10 o'clock. I turn off all of my technology and go outside for up to 2 hours, just walking around the neighborhoods around my apartment and enjoying nature. The streets are then deserted, with sidewalks illuminated by dull, buzzing street lamps and traffic lights cycling through their colors in the absence of any cars. I occasionally see other people, but any signs of life are usually nocturnal animals, opossums and raccoons and skunks, sniffing and stalking and living their lives at night just like I do. Perhaps that's where I went wrong. Maybe I saw myself as too much of a creature of the night when, in reality, I was just a tourist in it. I met a true creature of the night one night. He was almost a full block ahead of me when I first saw him, standing on the outskirts of a street lamp's beam. He was hard to see, but so was everything else on that night's walk. I had left later than usual, the moon was only a sliver of a crescent, and the sky was cloudy with the empty threat of rain. Even though it was about a half-hour walk from my apartment, I recognized the corner he stood on. I almost always saw wildlife there, a wild animal exploring the lawn beside where he was now standing. He was accompanied by a dog, which was leashed and crouching on the grass, the universal defecation pose. I assumed the man was older because he was leaning on a walking stick, patiently waiting for the dog to finish. I slowed my pace in the hopes of avoiding him. I'm not sure if it was simply allowing them space or some sort of instinctual fear. It felt like the latter, like when I mistook a hanging coat for a person in the dark. It wasn't even required. The dog had finished, and the man knelt down with a grocery bag to clean up after it. Then he reached down and removed the dog's muzzle. It shook with delight. He took a handful of something from his pocket and placed it in the dog's mouth. The dog sucked it up, tail wagging. The man had clearly trained it well, and his affection was visible. He patted the animal's head several times before re-muzzling it and tossing the rest of his pocket contents onto the lawn. They were off with a quick shake of the leash. In the way it walked, the dog appeared to be as old as the man, hobbling with joints that seemed to hurt with each step. They rounded the corner and vanished. If I hadn't kept going, that would have been the end of the encounter, the end of the story. But I didn't give up. I didn't see why I should. I'd only seen an old man and his old dog. I made my way to where he was standing for no particular reason other than it was the direction I was walking in. When I looked over at the grass to see what he'd left there, my suspicions were confirmed. A smattering of dog treats littered the yard. But there was something else on the sidewalk, not on the grass. I wouldn't have noticed if I hadn't first investigated the treats, but there were dog prints on the cement, similar to what you see on sidewalks after it rains or when a sprinkler breaks. These, however, were not the faded gray of water, nor were they the ever-evaporating shadow stamps I was used to. But their color remained familiar, it was the rusted red of blood, and it made my heart race. A pair of dog prints followed the two as they walked, smeared in places like they'd been dragged and becoming lighter and lighter as they went. The shape seemed off as well, swollen and out of place, barely recognizable. Something, perhaps a rock or a twig, must have gotten into its paws, and the old man must not have noticed. I tried to follow the prints for as long as I could, but they vanished after a while, either due to blood clotting or them veering off the sidewalks. I couldn't tell which was which. It made me feel uneasy. Part of me wanted to go home, but another part of me was restless, still not done with my nocturnal existence. But both parts of me agreed, I didn't want to see anyone else tonight. A new neighborhood is being built near where I was, complete with vacant lots and construction equipment. I used to go there when I needed to be alone, like now, so I pointed myself in that direction. It was just what I needed. It was empty, a void that had yet to be filled. Shells of never lived in houses surrounded me, rising out of the ground like half-finished anthills. I started to relax, my shoulders slumping after tensing them without even realizing it. I was interested in seeing the progress of the model flagship, which was being built deep within the development. I got about halfway there, enjoying the sound of silence that only comes when there are no other humans around. That is, until the silence was broken. I'm not sure what drew my attention to his presence. It was like inspiration, nothing for a moment, and then it hit. Because there was no artificial lighting in the neighborhood at the time, I saw his shape more than anything else. He was standing on the front stoop of a half-completed house, its wooden frame eerily resembling a jail cell behind him. His dog sat behind him, almost as if he were a toddler with his mother. He leaned back on his stick and just stared at me. I called out to him, "Hello." He didn't respond. He didn't even acknowledge my words, just kept his unflinching gaze on me. I didn't know what to do, so I continued to speak. "I'm sorry, but I believe your dog has been injured." "Who? Marley?" His tone was rough and raspy. He didn't seem to use it much. "If Marley is your dog, then absolutely. I saw some bloody paw prints earlier and I believe there isn't anything wrong with Marley." He cut me off with the declaration, the authority in his voice mirroring his own resolve. "I came here to save old Marley. He was an outcast. Didn't I find him out here late at night and take good care of him, boy?" Marley's head was scratched, but the dog didn't move. "Would you like to meet him? He doesn't bite or do anything else. Well, unless I tell him otherwise." He laughed quietly, which told me his joke wasn't really a joke at all. "That's fine. Just thought I'd let you know." In my head, there was a silent flashing, like a fire alarm without the siren, the same one I'd learned to trust in the past. "I have to get going anyway." "Yeah, what's a pretty little thing like you doing out this late?" That was all. This was no longer a discussion. I turned around and began walking as fast as I could without running. I expected him to continue talking to me, to yell at my back as I turned to face him, but he didn't. What I did hear was even more disturbing. There was a tremor, the jangle of a collar and leash, and the clicking of his tongue. "Come on, kid," I overheard him saying. I looked over my shoulder without pausing. He was about 20 feet behind me, not on the steps. The man walked faster than I thought he could, and Marley did his best to keep up with him. The man's movements were still jovial and childlike, despite the fact that he was still bathed in darkness. He acted as if he was playing tag. I couldn't think of anything else but getting away. The main road wasn't far away, and I knew that once there, I'd be able to attract someone's attention. It was pointless being out here. I began to run. Normally, hearing anything behind me would be impossible due to my own pounding heart and intake of breath. However, my senses were heightened, and I felt as if I could hear everything. It got closer with the steps and the jangle of the leash. And getting closer. I was sprinting at full speed, and he was closing the gap. My face was on fire, and my lungs were on fire. I knew I couldn't keep it up indefinitely. But the man appeared to be capable. Then everything fell silent. The sound of his footsteps behind me had faded, as had the rhythmic jangling of the leash. As I ran, I checked behind me once, twice, and 3 times. He had vanished. I had no idea where he was, but he was gone. I came to a halt, my chest ready to explode, and searched the area around me. Nothing. I wanted to cry and scream in relief all at once. But then he was back, inches away from me. The chase had ended. For the first time, I noticed he was holding the walking stick by the middle, and it wasn't a cane at all. It came to an end with a knitted plastic that was designed to be wrapped around people's necks. It was a pole for catching dogs. As he smiled at me, he held it with practiced finesse. "Atta, Lady. He squealed. You're doing fantastic. I took a step back, but he only moved closer to me. I scoured the ground for anything that could be used as a weapon against him. Instead, my gaze was drawn to his dog's feet. They weren't, however, dog feet. Sure, they were the right shape. But they were infected, gnarled and bloody. They were fingers. Hands of humans. The thumbs had been removed, and the remaining fingers had been bent at the knuckle and sewn together, resembling a dog's paw. Screws protruded in front of them, as if hammered through the back as a replacement for claws. His back legs were stumps, cut off at the knee, covered by sweatpants, the legs of it tied off at the ends. He was on all fours, a muzzle over his mouth. It was unnecessary, however, because he made no attempt to make a sound. He just stared, his eyes welling up with tears, his head and brows shaved above them. Well, look at this, Marley. We appear to have made a new friend. I screamed for help. I told you he was nice. I believe he likes you. An aluminum wire was stuck into his lower back to imitate a tail. The man picked it up and shook it as if it were wagging. Marley winced in pain beneath the muzzle. Perhaps we'll get puppies out of this. Won't that be interesting? Something in me snapped. I pushed myself back and sprinted away from him, away from the tortured creature on the ground, away from my own thoughts. There was a numbing sensation, as if I were watching it all on a screen. Just like it was on my laptop at home. I only looked back once after hearing him try to run after me. Marley was motionless. The man was attempting to drag him, but he refused. He looked at me with the same mournful expression in his eyes. The man yelled and hit Marley with the stick, but he didn't move. Despite all of this, he did not attack the man. He turned his heel. His training had not gone to waste. I made it back home, though I have no idea how. The next thing I recall is a howling sob I let out on my bed, behind closed doors, back inside, alone. He couldn't locate me here. I was secure. It took weeks for me to be able to go for a walk again. The next time I did it was around dusk, shortly after the end of the workday. I made my way to the street corner where it all began. I'm not sure what I was hoping to find. Maybe whoever Marley was standing there escaped and became a man again. However, it was empty. I stood there for a few moments, wondering what had happened to him and the man, if it was all a nightmare. A chipmunk scurried by below me. It picked something up from the grass and stuffed it into its already stuffed cheeks. I leaned in to look, knowing exactly what I was going to see. The yard was strewn with sweets. I returned home before it got dark.